Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your patience tonight. We had a few scheduling issues. I had an event in West Roxbury, so I got stopped on the way out the door, and I couldn't quite get out quick enough. My name's Annissa Essaibi-George, and I'm running for City Council at large. I am born and raised in Dorchester. I am the daughter of immigrants. My dad came in his 20s from Tunisia. My mother came as a child from Poland by way of Germany. And my husband and I still live in Dorchester, and we have 4 children. I have a 10-year-old boy and 9-year-old triplets. I am a Boston Public School teacher. I've been a teacher at East Boston High for 13 years. And I'm also a small business owner. I own the Stitch House in Dorchester, which is a knitting and sewing store. And we teach loads of classes, and we sell beautiful yarn and fabric and all sorts of fun things. I'm running for Boston City Council because I think it's important to have someone with my experiences on the council, both as a parent, but more importantly as a school teacher and a business owner. I think it's incredibly important when we talk about schools in the city of Boston that we have someone that can talk about classroom experiences firsthand, both as a teacher and as a parent of a public school child. And to speak also about some of the challenges of getting our kids into the public schools. My triplets are not in public schools as of yet, although we hope the end of this week we'll get some good news. It's unfortunate that I'm waiting until the first week in June to hear about some placements that are happening, but that's what it is. I think that's my...
You have 30 more seconds.
Oh, my 30 seconds, sorry. Thank you. I ran in 2013. I finished 5th out of the original field of 19. I think I did really well, but not good enough to win. My goal is obviously to win, and I look forward to doing that. And as part of winning, I also hope to double the amount of women, or be a part of doubling the amount of women on the City Council. The Olympics is the question I think I probably get most. Usually I first get, are your children boys or girls? But they're all boys. As someone who loves the city of Boston, the idea of the Olympics is incredibly exciting. A 3-week party that we celebrate sort of, sportsmanship and athletics and, all that sort of stuff is incredibly exciting. The problem, though, is with the conversation around the Olympics and what's on the table, what we know about and what we don't know about. And it makes me incredibly skeptical, makes me incredibly anxious about the way that the ideas around the Olympics have been rolled out, the financial commitment, whether we have one as a city and as taxpayers, whether we don't. All of that has been sort of covered in darkness around this conversation has been sort of shameful, I think, of what Boston 2024 has done. We have not yet seen sort of the full picture. That makes me incredibly concerned about the time period leading up to the Olympics and what we're going to be left with after the Olympics. I think as Boston 2024 rolls out more and more plans, they roll out more and more expenses. And I wish that we had a better picture. I wish that they were certainly more transparent. But I wish that they had come out and told us and would tell us, because I still know that there's so much that hasn't been uncovered about the Olympics. And I know with any of those dollar amounts that they've discussed, the smallest amount of that dollar amount, I think about what I could do in my classroom and what I could do in my classroom 1,000 times over with that. The excitement would be the benefit. Sort of that adding to our tourism, although Boston's already a destination, so I don't think we need to so much add to our tourism about it. I'm incredibly concerned about the idea of taking land. Both public and private land is incredibly scary as a property owner, as a business owner. It's a frightening proposition to me. Not to take away from that 3 weeks of excitement, but all that stuff around it I think is a lot to ask a city, and it's a lot to ask people in government to support. I think that there's no possible way at this point without all of the information. We don't know everything that Boston 2024 knows. And that's shameful of them for not sharing it with us up front and from the beginning. And I think it would have been incredibly reasonable for them to come before the city as a whole and share the good, the bad, and the ugly. I want to know the ugly. And it's, many of us may be okay with some of that ugly, but we haven't heard about it, and it's scary. And until they're willing to share it all, and be very, forthcoming with the details of the before piece and then what happens in the after piece. So with any of the facilities, who's going to own and have sort of ownership over that property afterwards? We don't know, and there's a story today, and then there's going to be a different story tomorrow, which is incredibly frustrating. As someone that's been asked to take a position one way or another, it's incredibly frustrating that we don't know everything, and we really should. It is certainly something that's happening across the city. I realize that we're here in JP. It's happening where I grew up and live in Dorchester. I think what we need to do is talk about a few things all at once when we talk about housing. We need to stop talking so much about adding luxury housing, because that the market will take care of. I think as a city council, we need to focus on bringing more opportunities for affordable housing and workforce housing, but sort of housing that people can afford, as opposed to just calling it affordable housing. And the formulas that the state uses, that the city has to use, that the formulas don't always make a whole lot of sense, and that I don't think that in many ways that they seem reasonable. But I think we also need to talk about student housing, because that affects sort of the supply of housing in all of our neighborhoods, not just in our college-rich neighborhoods, because we see, year after year that our college populations are sort of filtering into our more residential neighborhoods that weren't affected by colleges so much. And we need to talk about homelessness. We need to talk about it in a real way, because we've got to get, especially our families, into from shelters into transitional housing, into permanent housing, and that's a focus that I think that the City Council can take a bigger lead on. Well, especially for women, and especially for women with children, and especially for women with children that are boys. And boys, when they reach a certain age, aren't welcome into a lot of our family shelters or our women's shelters, and that's a significant problem, especially as a mother of boys. So a few things let me start with Long Island Shelter. We knew that bridge had some significant issues for a long time. And granted, we can't sort of go back and change that, but the residents of the Long Island Shelter and those that worked over at the shelter should have taken measures a lot sooner than they did, so that people could the residents of Long Island Shelter could move out, or get their belongings and leave. But sort of the root problem of that is, why did we have a shelter operating in the city of Boston that people made their homes? Why were they there for so long before we found transitional housing for them and then moved them into permanent housing? A shelter is not supposed to be a home. A shelter is supposed to be for emergency housing, and then we need to, as a city, come together and work to find more permanent housing. When I talk about homelessness, I tend to apply it to myself and my work as a school teacher. We have in Boston Public Schools 4,500 children that are brought in every day from shelters across the state, not the city. If a family becomes homeless, in order to get housing right away, oftentimes you have to leave the city in order to get that housing. And we as a city need to pay for them to come in every day. And it's our duty, it's our moral duty, it's our legal duty to do that, to bring our kids in. Because I know as a teacher, my classroom, my school is maybe the only consistent, stable environment that children has in their life. So we need to be able to do that. But we should also be providing family shelters closer to their schools and closer to where those families live and sort of experience their life. And a child spending hours on a school bus to go back to a shelter in Brockton, we're not helping that family be more successful or be successful to come out of homelessness. And we're certainly not helping that child learn better and be more productive. The cost of housing is expensive for students. And one of the reactions I've seen, although some kids may turn away an opportunity to come to school in Boston, what I think happens maybe more often is that they overload in a particular apartment. And we've got too many people living in one apartment, so it is more affordable. I think as a city, we need to lean more strongly on our universities to support their student body with housing, because it relieves some of the housing crisis that happens in our neighborhoods for regular residents as opposed to student residents. But we also need to start, our universities, we need to hold them more accountable, make them more responsible for the students and for lowering their tuitions, because the tuitions are out of control in the city of Boston. My dad was a security guard at BU, so I got to go for free. My sister got to go for free. He got 2 masters out of the deal. He worked his tail off, but we lived at home, so we were able to save that expense. Otherwise, I couldn't afford it. And there are too many kids like me, there are too many kids like the students I teach at East Boston High that can't afford a college education and still commute from home. So we need to lean on them more. We also need to lean on our universities to start contributing to the pilot program in a significant way. They take a lot of resources from the city. And granted, they provide some incredible opportunities for our youth, especially, and jobs for our working adults. But I think that the pilot program needs to have a rebirth and really become a significant resource for us in the city. The answer is yes. I think one of the things we need to start doing, I'm sorry, I'm getting warm. It's the lights or the... One of the things I think we need to start doing as a city in our schools at our youngest ages is working to, and we do it to some degree, but working to really engage kids in school in a creative way. Because a kid may not do great in math, but they do really good in entrepreneurship class, which is math. And one of the things that I've taught at my high school is in our entrepreneurship program, and we find this works with lots of different kids, but in East Boston, it's a high immigrant population. These kids want to own their own businesses, and they want to do work that's meaningful to them. And if you do a cost-benefit analysis, or you do a profit and loss statement, or you design a business plan with these kids, and they could talk about return on investment from their $50 seed money that we get for them, they're learning math. And they're engaged in mathematical concepts. Or if they're writing a business plan, or they're arguing for funding, which we have all of our kids participate in a business plan competition. That's English language arts. That's really connecting with meaningful learning for them, but still teaching them what they need to learn to be sort of successful adults. On the assignment process, I'll start with your second question first. Again, from personal experience, but this isn't just happening to me, it's happening across the city. I don't know until Friday where my kids might get assigned next year. That's, June 5th is the date that they tell me I'm going to hear. It doesn't leave me a lot of time to make alternative plans for my kids for next year. I have, as far as their current school knows, they're not coming back, but I don't know where they're going. And I've got some time on my hands because I happen to be on leave to campaign, so I can figure it out. But if I'm working a job or 2 jobs, that doesn't leave me much time to start visiting other schools, seeing who has seats available, where what might be the best fit for my kid. So that's, I think, the biggest challenge that I'm seeing firsthand with the new assignment process is that the timelines are off. And that's also why I think it's important to have parents of school-age children, parents in general, at the table when these decisions are being made. Because I look at my agenda and someone says, okay, we're meeting about when we're going to roll out our assignments, and someone says June 5th. I'm looking at my calendar and saying my kids have 2 weeks left of school at that point. That date's not going to work. And that's something that has changed, I think, for the negative with the school assignment process. I do support the charter cap. I think that as a Boston public school teacher and as a Boston city councilor, my priority needs to be what's happening in our Boston public schools and really make sure that all of our funding that comes from the state goes into our schools the way it should. Right now, the way that the funding model is set up, charter schools sort of get paid up front and in a slightly different timeline, whereas the public schools wait, and oftentimes we're robbing Peter to pay Paul for the following school year, and it doesn't help with planning. I also think that our public schools need to have more autonomy within each individual school for how, so that there's more flexibility if they want to provide an entrepreneurship class or if they want to add an extra art program or class because they know the personality of that school. And that's one of the things the charter schools have been very successful at, is keeping that autonomy and being more flexible for the needs of their students. And we can learn that and take that from them, and I wish that we'd implement that. I would support it. I'm not deeply familiar with it, so I don't feel comfortable talking about it in any sort of depth. But housing is absolutely something that we need. We need affordable housing. We need affordable family housing units that are big enough to house families and house them so that they want to stay in the city. That's one of the reasons many families will end up leaving, is because there's just not enough space in order to have, you know, I don't know how many people are having 4 children anymore, but space is an incredibly valuable thing to have. Well, I think that in the city of Boston, we know who our bad property owners are. And we as a city need to take a very aggressive stand against them. I think most of our property owners don't need the tax incentive. The good property owners don't need the tax incentive in order to keep rents low. But there are obviously some of the larger landlords that own, you know, hundreds and hundreds of units across the city that we do need to offer them some sort of carrot in order to keep those rents low, because then we end up, you know, in this overloaded condition that is unsafe, it's unhealthy, and it's unproductive for building a strong community and, you know, people that want to stay in the community. So yeah, I would support that. And I think that we need to be very careful about how quickly we allow someone to evict a tenant that's been a tenant in good standing for a period of time, simply because the property value maybe has gone up and they want to, you know, transition the house from rental to condos or whatever the case might be. It is something we absolutely should be doing in Boston. I am a business owner. I have staff, and they deserve to be paid well. They also deserve to be paid well enough to live in the city that they work, and they also deserve to be paid well enough to afford the products that I sell. I think that, you know, and fortunately for my employees, most of them, that's their concern. But we can, you know, backtrack this to families in the city of Boston, the kids that I teach that have to work in order to support their family because their parent or parents aren't making enough of a living to support the families. We've got, you know, kids at the high school level that day in and day out leave school to work a 40-hour work week. They come in the next day, we expect them to perform, we expect them to be successful, we expect them to be awake and on time, and they're not because they're supporting their family. We also have a large population of our kids that are independent and not necessarily emancipated from their parents, but they are living alone or living with other young people, still going to school but fully supporting themselves, and they need to be able to earn a wage that will allow them to do that. Well, a few things around the Madison Park conversation. First, I went to Boston Technical High School, which is right next door to Madison Park. I had a technical education. I took electronics and drafting and sheet metal and architecture, and I had a fantastic technical education while I was still college bound. And I think that having that experience made me a more well-rounded student, lends itself to, you know, I did a lot of geometry and sheet metal. And I think our vocational education programs should be available to all of our students across the city of Boston, that East Boston High, Charlestown High, West Roxbury High, or whatever they're called now, they've all got different names, those students should have access to some vocational training. Not at the same extent that Madison Park sort of has everything, but they should be able to have some focus, and kids in those schools have access to vocational ed. As a city, we should also be using the work that Madison Park does right now, those kids, on our job sites. They should be cooking our food. So when we have, you know, city events, the culinary arts program at Madison Park should be catering those city-funded, city-run events. You know, their cookies are just as good as anyone else's cookies, and we should be supporting the programs that our kids participate in. I think that Madison Park should be a gem where people, you know, the same way they do to some degree at Latin school, for example, lie about their address so they can stay at that school. Families should be lying about living in the city so that they can go to Madison Park, as opposed to the opposite that happens. Families will say, you know, they pick a vocation like HVAC that Madison doesn't have so that they can get their kid out of the city to go to, not Blue Hills, but one of the other maybe Minuteman, yeah, one of the other schools outside of the city. And we really need to double down. I do know as a school teacher and as a city councilor, because I'm a school teacher by profession, that I'll be called on to talk about these issues, and I think it's a good table for me to be at. I also think that as a city council, although our sort of priority or job number one is the budget, that we need to be very creative and very specific about how, as a city councilor, I can work around that process to make sure that things that are important to our kids and to our families and our schools happen in the budget.
All right, that's it for our time.
Good. Thank you. No, thank you.